My name is Teresa Liu from the Secretariat of Asian Bankers Association, the ABA. I will be your MC today. On behalf of the ABA, Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, and Hatta National Bank, I would like to welcome you all to the third day of the virtual 38th ABA General Meeting and Conference. Now we are ready to begin with Session 3, focusing on the topic, Promoting a Sustainable World, Fostering Green Finance. May we now invite the Chairman of Session 3, Mr. Eugene Acevedo, President and CEO, Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, and Chairman of the ABA, to please take the floor. Over to you, Mr. Acevedo.
Good day to our Asian Banking Association members and guests. Today, we will tackle a topic that has gathered significant momentum in the last 3 years. Our theme for this plenary is Promoting a Sustainable World, Fostering Green Finance. The session will feature speakers, all of them experts in their fields, who will share their insights on the need for greening the financial system, the role of financial governance, and examine the state of green lending and investment in Asia. They will also provide an overview of market innovations and green financial governance initiatives across the region. Our format is this. The 3 speakers will speak, and then we will have a common Q&A session. So please, while they're speaking, start writing your questions in the question box that you can find below your screen. Our first speaker is Ms. Eliza Lee. Ms. Lee is the chairman of Sustainability Service of PricewaterhouseCoopers in Taiwan. Her expertise includes sustainability report consulting and assurance, net zero strategy and science-based target consulting, impact valuation, and ESG investing. She's the current leader of PwC's Taiwan Sustainability and Climate Change and ESG Services. She's part of the GRI Standard Translation Peer Review Committee, of the Integrated Reporting Framework Translation Working Group. She was the leader of the 2013 PwC Asia Pacific Carbon Disclosure Project Scoring Team. And she is a certified public accountant in Taiwan, USA, and China. Ms. Lee has a Master of Accounting from George Washington University and Bachelor of Accounting from National Taiwan University. Ms. Lee, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. This is Eliza from PwC Taiwan, and it is my honor to be invited by ABA and to share my observation and share my topic today. A sustainable finance trend analysis, especially the Taiwan example, with all of you. So here's my agenda to share with you all today. The first one will be the ESG capital market trend. And the second one, I will give more details about how Taiwan fosters sustainable finance. And then I have 2 slides of ending message to share with you. And first of all, may I say a few words about PwC Taiwan's sustainable services. And with all these diverse professionals and our dedication to sustainability, as you can see from the screen, we have now more than 80 diverse sustainability professionals working with us, PwC Taiwan, for our clients' sustainability. And we introduce important international standards and methodology to Taiwan to help our clients establishing their sustainability and net zero emission strategy, apply best practice governance, report their ESG information with transparency and quality, and also communicating with their stakeholders. In summary, we, PwC Taiwan, work as a team to bring the world's best sustainability practice to Taiwan companies. And we also support them to create sustainability impact to Taiwan sustainability and to the world. As you can see, all the acronym of different international standards and methodology. That's all we do for all our Taiwan company and Taiwan client. Next one, in the first session, I would like to share with you our observation on the capital market trends regarding ESG. Based on the information we collected from MSCI as indicated, from September 2007 to 2022, the cumulated index performance for MSCI Taiwan ESG leaders has outperformed MSCI Taiwan. We have a few observations from this trend, and you may have seen similar information from different sources. The first one is that, as you can see, the growth returns gap is getting more and more prominent, which indicated ESG improving companies' financial performance is pronounced. And ESG investment can help investors preserve their investment value during social turmoil, such as during COVID-19, as you can see from this information. Another one is that ESG-driven risk management and ESG-driven innovations are expected to further improve companies' financial performance. As you can see from this slide, I'm going to share with you that PwC Global 2021 Investor Survey. And this survey tells us more about ESG economic realities. First one, about 79% of the investee responded that ESG risks are important factors in investment decision-making. 75% say that companies should address ESG issues, even if doing so may reduce short-term profitability, but definitely will increase their long-term value. And the third one, 49% of investors say they are willing to divest from companies that aren't taking sufficient actions on ESG issues. Also, from this survey, we can see what topics or issues investors care about the most. That is the Scope 1 and Scope 2 carbon emission reductions. And we can also see other issues that investors care about on the slide, including ensuring workers' health and safety, and also improving workforce and executive diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are reasons that investors care about the carbon emission. From this slide, we can see climate change affects not only manufacturing companies. According to the report from Swiss Re Institute, economic losses due to natural disasters in 2021 has reached $280 billion, and the insured losses has reached $119 billion. This is a very high number, and this is a lot higher than the average of the past 10 years. So that's why investors care about carbon emission. Not only investors see the severe damage that climate change, carbon emission, and rising Earth's temperature have caused. Most of the countries and companies also noted this. So we can see from the number of countries and companies that committed to net zero from this slide. That's the information we collected from the zerotracker.net. We can see these countries that committed to net zero cover 83% of emissions, 91% of GDPs, and 80% of populations. And we also have 799 companies that have committed to the net zero. Net zero is critical and have to achieve. However, net zero is not easy. Based on PwC's Global Net Zero Economy Index 2022, we can see this critical and urgent requirement or need for carbon reduction. In 2021, global carbon intensity fell by 0.5%, but this is the lowest in the last decades. So we need to work very hard to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. And to achieve that, we have to achieve the to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, we need the annual decarbonization rate of 15.2%. That's a lot higher than what we have achieved in 2021. So we need to work very hard on taking all the actions to achieve our goal, net zero. I mentioned previously, we need to take actions. We also need infusion of funds from investors to help companies, industries, and countries to achieve net zero. Net zero investment demand grows substantially as a result. According to IEA estimates that an annual capital spending of $360 billion is required for energy industry to achieve net zero emission by 2050. So we can see from this diagram, the need for funds to achieve net zero by 2050 for clean energy is a lot higher than what we have done during the 2016 to 2022 on average. In addition, according to Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, it estimates that an investment of $32 trillion is required in low carbon energy supply. For example, the electricity and also related industry, for example, transportation, construction, and industrial equipment by 2030. So we can see the spread of investment among different industry and different areas. Electricity industry has the highest demand, and China needs the most investment in net zero, according to Glasgow Financial Alliance numbers. To summarize, ESG and net zero is not just a good, but a must business practice. As a result, we see that ESG is leading the capital markets direction, and the capital market will also affect ESG and net zero development. And we need to work together. We need financial sector to support industries with funds for their ESG and net zero actions. We also need industry to feedback with transition plans, strategies and actions, and the performance information to facilitate financial sector's investment decision making. And we also need governments and the regulator to have sustainable finance policies and regulations to support the fund flowing into ESG and net zero actions. So now let's take a look at how Taiwan financial institutions, how Taiwan capital market regulators, and how Taiwanese companies foster Taiwan's sustainable finance. From this slide, I would like to share with you that Taiwan Capital Market Regulator, which is Financial Supervisory Commission, has been having different requirements and policies to ensure Taiwan-listed companies and financial institutions move towards ESG and now towards net zero. From embedding ESG in corporate governance policies and ratings in 2014, requiring certain listed companies to publish their CSR report following GRI, and then promoting responsible investment through announcing corporate and ESG index, then announcing new corporate governance and green finance policies to establish sustainable finance ecosystem. And recently, in September 2022, FSC announced new green finance 3.0 policies and requirements to help Taiwan achieve 2050 net zero commitment through sustainable finance. And I will give you more information and details in my next presentation. First, talk about how what capital markets policies are in Taiwan by capital market regulators. We share this slide to show the policies and measures that make up Taiwan's sustainable finance market. As you can see from this slide, Taiwan listed company, or the most of Taiwan listed company at different phase, need to disclose different ESG and sustainability information following different standards. For example, they need to publish their sustainability report following GRI standards, and some have to follow SASB guidelines and TCFD. And also, starting from 2014, their annual report need to disclose climate-related information, and also later on, the greenhouse gas information. In addition to information disclosure, financial institutions are required to follow different international standards, such as PRI, PSI, PRB, and EP. And Taiwan Capital Market Regulator also announced Taiwan's taxonomy to help facilitate financial institutions to implement their green finance. And we have the official platform that collects ESG information from listed company that I can share with you more later on. A capital market regulator also announced their incentives, including that we will have our sustainable finance rating, and the rating will be announced later this year and will start from next year. And as I mentioned previously, starting from 2014, we have been having corporate governance rating. And Taiwan regulator also pay attention to the containment of greenwashing. So we have different principles to prevent investors or to prevent financial institutions have different announcing their ESG funds and sales in the market while not actually following the ESG principle or standards. And this is the official platforms that our regulators has established to provide ESG rating information. As you can see, all the listed companies in Taiwan have their corporate governance evaluation ratings in the ESG platform. Everyone have access to this platform and this information. And the ESG platform also collects the ESG ratings from different international ESG rating agencies. For example, the Sustainalytics, MSCI, Rizal, and ISS, and also S&P Global ESG scores to have this information publicly known by all the stakeholders in order to facilitate ESG investment. In addition to that, all listed companies are required to disclose their ESG information, 29 ESG indicators on our market observation post system. And these 29 indicators cover GHG emission, energy management, and water usage, water resources, and human capital development, and board of director functions, and also investor communications. In addition to that, as mentioned previously, Taiwan announced our phase 1 taxonomy to define sustainable economic activities. And this is the phase 1, so it covers only manufacturing, construction, transportation, and warehousing industries. For the manufacturing, it covers a few high carbon emission industry like glass, like steel, like textile. And in the future, there will be more taxonomy to be announced to define more sustainable economic activities to facilitate Taiwan's sustainable financial markets. And under the taxonomy regulations, this industry are also required to disclose their quantitative indicator by industry. Different industry need to disclose different quantitative indicator under the taxonomy guidelines. In addition, Taipei Exchange also established Taiwan's sustainable bond market to help companies raising funds for sustainability. As you can see from this slide, we have sustainable use of proceeds bonds that comprising green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds. And in July, Taipei Exchange also announced the sustainability linked bonds, SLBs. And SLB, as many of you would have known, that is a new structure of sustainable bonds, and it requires unrestricted use of funds. And it also focuses on the issues overall sustainability goals, but not particular specific sustainability goals. And ever since the announcement of Taiwan's sustainable bond market in 2017, the issuance amount has grown about 4 times by 2020. So you can see Taiwanese companies are very into raising funds from Taipei Exchange sustainable bond market to help them achieve their sustainability. As mentioned previously, in September, Taiwan regulator announced further more policies to urge the green finance in Taiwan or sustainable finance in Taiwan. That is Green Finance 3.0. It covers different dimensions from the disclosure of carbon emission information and also medium long-term carbon reduction targets and strategy, especially for financial institutions. They need to disclose and set targets for the carbon emission reduction targets for their Scope 3, that is investment and finance carbon emission. And we also have different requirements or policy to encourage finance and financial institutions to incorporate the guidelines of identifying sustainable economic activities into their strategic planning, investment, and financing information. And the regulator also would like to build an ESG information platform to improve the ESG information platform to further facilitate the information exchange between investee and investors. And in addition, Taiwan regulator will also have more policies to help Taiwan to cultivate Taiwan's public awareness of ESG and also train financial institutions, employees, members, and participants to know more about sustainable finance. So they plan to introduce sustainable finance licenses or certification. And the regulator also would like to create a more comprehensive financial ecosystem to foster sustainable finance, including the establish the first mover alliances comprising different Taiwan financial institutions that have done a lot more than the rest of the financial institution and share their practice to help other Taiwan financial institutions to move towards sustainable finance. Let me share you about how Taiwan financial institutions done and taken actions in Taiwan to achieve their sustainable finance goals. I believe most participants of this event are familiar with Equator Principle, a principle of responsible investment, principle of sustainable insurance, and principle of responsible banking. Although Taiwan financial institutions cannot sign up for PRI, PSI, and PRB, many of them have adopted and integrated these international initiatives on a self-proclaimed basis. They either have set up their own responsible investment principles following these initiatives, or have embedded all these requirements in their financing decision-making or designing of their services and products, or some of them are in the process of working towards this. In addition, we can see from these slides, Taiwan banks are working hard to promote sustainability-linked loan to create ESG impact, either by financial institutions themselves or help Taiwanese company to create ESG impact. So I share with you Taiwan's largest sustainability-linked loan that is from TSMC. And the next one is the first sustainability-linked loan for state-owned business, which is CPC in Taiwan. So in the interest of time, I will leave this information to share with you maybe later on during Q&A section. Many companies, including financial institutions, have committed to achieve net zero by 2050. However, before that, many of them also have committed to achieve science-based target of emission reduction on a 5 to 10 years timeline. SBTI, which is Science-Based Target Initiative, is a joint global initiative among Carbon Disclosure Program, CDP, the United Nations Global Impact Compact, the World Research Institute, WRI, and the World Wide Fund for Nature, WWF. And this initiative guides companies and financial institutions to formulate their decarbonization pathways with carbon reduction and speed necessary to avoid severe impact from climate change by promoting the establishment of reduction and net zero target in line with climate science, namely the science-based targets. So based on the information we collected from SBTI website and other public information, as of October 25th, 36 Asian financial institutions committed. They will set their science-based targets, including 5 Taiwan financial institutions. Remarkably, 9 Asian financial institutions have had their targets set and approved by SBTI. Out of these 9, 5 are financial institutions from Taiwan. So based on this information shared, I think many of them can share my insight and my observation that how Taiwan financial institution cares about their commitment to help the world and help Taiwan society to achieve net zero. Here comes my ending message. We can see the sustainable finance development trends in capital markets. However, in addition to capital market, in the corporate side, we have seen many critical trends that has happened during past few years and that worthwhile noticing by Taiwanese company and worthwhile noticing by all the participants. First of all is the information disclosure and the implementation of ESG and net zero from voluntary to mandatory. And the capital market and all the different requirements as company to integrating their financial and non-financial information together. And financial sectors, along with other sectors, are facing the carbon anxiety because either with their commitment or either by their country policy, they are required to achieve net zero by either 2040, 2050, or sometime around 2050. And the capital markets are working hard to prevent greenwashing. So all the companies need to have their mechanism, need to integrate the ESG into their business strategy, need to have the engagement with their stakeholders to understand their stakeholders' expectation and their stakeholders wish the company to achieve. And they also need to the measurement to properly disclose and measure their ESG performance and to bring the transparency and the quality of ESG information to their stakeholders. You can see the sustainable finance ecosystem drives Taiwan's sustainable futures. Among this ecosystem, we see financial institutions, we see corporate, we see the advocacy groups, and investors, clients, and the public, and also the regulators from Taiwan. They each play very important roles in Taiwan's sustainable finance ecosystem, and every one of them have worked very hard to help companies, help the public, help Taiwan society, and also help Taiwan to achieve sustainability and also net zero. And among all this, I think financial sector, financial institution play a very critical role, because if finance won't move, the world won't move. Thank you very much. And this is Eliza from PwC Taiwan. Thank you.
I am sure the audience has some questions. I have questions already. And I think later during the Q&A, it would be good to talk about the two landmark loans. Those are very interesting loans. Those loans provide a discount to the loan rate, to the interest rate, if the borrower continues to perform against its sustainability targets. I think there will be a lot of interest. I think that is, you intentionally left that for the Q&A because that is really interesting. Okay, we will take you up on that later. Meantime, our second speaker is Tiange Wei, is the Asia Pacific lead at the PCAF Secretariat. PCAF stands for Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. She supervises all regional activities. As part of the PCAF Secretariat, Tiange and her colleagues support the initiative to develop the first ever global GHG accounting and reporting standard for the financial industry, marked with the official Built on GHG Protocol mark. She's also a senior consultant at Guidehouse, where she supports financial institutions and other large corporations to understand their climate-related impact, risks, and opportunities. Ms. Wei has 2 graduate degrees, a master's in climate change, management and finance from the Imperial College London, and Master of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Bath. Tiange, please, the floor is yours.
Dear distinguished guest, I'm very honored and delighted to be here and present to you PCAF, which stands for the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, and enabling financial institutions to assess and disclose the greenhouse gas emissions of their financial activities. So over the next 25 minutes, I will touch up on some of the greenhouse gas accounting terms. For instance, Ms. Eliza also presented Scope 1, 2, and 3. I will also introduce you to a new terminology called finance emissions and share my observations on the value of measuring finance emissions. So addressing the urgent challenge of climate change is more pressing now than ever, and banks represent most of the available capital globally. So financial institutions, they are increasingly aware of their responsibility to finance the decarbonization of the global economy, and stakeholders are also demanding transparency in financial flows. So as a first step in this direction, harmonized and transparent greenhouse gas accounting becomes an imperative. Measuring and disclosing the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the lending and investment activities of financial institutions, that is the foundation to create transparency and accountability, and to enable financial institutions align their portfolio with the Paris Climate Agreement and collectively reach net zero emissions by 2050. So I mentioned greenhouse gas and greenhouse gas emissions several times. I just want to share with you what it means and how we categorize them into scopes. So greenhouse gas emissions, they are categorized into 3 scopes. Scope 1, this covers the direct emissions from owned and controlled sources. And Scope 2 covers the indirect emissions from the generation of purchased electricity, steam, heating, and cooling consumed by the reporting company, for instance, a bank. So now Scope 3, it has 15 categories. And what we focus on when we mention finance emissions and when we mention greenhouse gas accounting of emissions from loans and investments, we are focusing on Scope 3, category 15, and that's it, that is investments. So financial institutions indirectly create a climate impact through their loans and investments. And the terminology finance emissions are referred to the greenhouse gas emissions associated with these climate impacts. So specifically, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol defined these emissions as Scope 3 Category 15 emissions of financial institutions. So the key principle here is that financial institutions indirectly create a climate impact through their long-term investment. And this Scope 3 Category 15 emissions, they are generally the largest component of the climate impact of financial institutions. And research has shown that portfolio emissions of global financial institutions are on average 700 times larger than direct emissions. So this means to reach net zero by 2050 or any other carbon reduction goals, it is crucial for financial institutions to decarbonize its portfolio, and their current level of finance emissions will set the foundation for measuring progress. So given the scale of the climate challenge and the crucial role of the financial industry in facilitating the net zero carbon transition, PCAF, the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, was created in 2015. So what is PCAF and what does PCAF stands for? So the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, it is a global partnership of financial institutions that work together to develop and implement a harmonized approach to assess and disclose the greenhouse gas emissions associated with loans and investment. It is an industry-led initiative and is funded by philanthropies. So PCAF started in the Netherlands, and in 2018, PCAF expanded into North America, and a group of financial institutions decided to globalize this initiative in 2019. We are governed by a global steering committee who sets the strategy and the overall direction of the initiative. So we launched globally in September 2019, and we have come a long way in less than a few years' time. So currently, where we are now, we are present in over 60 countries worldwide. That's over 300 financial institutions and representing over 80+ trillion of US dollars of total assets. It is worth to mention that 20% of our partnership are from the Asia Pacific region, and we boast diversity through the variety in the type of financial institutions. So our network includes commercial banks, asset managers, insurance company, and also financial services groups. Our objectives are twofold, as you can see them on the right-hand side of the slide. Number one is to develop the global greenhouse gas accounting and reporting standard for the financial industry, and I will tell you more about that later in my presentation. And secondly, to reach 250 financial institutions worldwide by the end of this year. And as you can see, we have already achieved this objective, but we will continue to grow and support financial institutions globally with their greenhouse gas accounting journey. So over 20% of the financial institutions in PCAF are from the Asia Pacific regions. That is representing more than 23 trillion of US dollars in total financial assets. And Asia Pacific region, it accounted for over 30% of all new PCAF signatories in the last 6 months. So we look forward to supporting these financial institutions on their journey. So one of the objectives, the first objective I touched up on was to develop a standard, a harmonized approach for greenhouse gas accounting in the financial industry. So over the years, PCAF, we went through several phases of development, and we launched the first edition of the PCAF standard in November 2020. It is worth to point out, actually, at the bottom of this slide, what makes this standard very credible is that the standard has been reviewed by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And what that means is all the requirements and recommendations in the PCAF standard is in conformance with the requirements set forth in the corporate value chain. So that's the Scope 3 standard. So what is included in the first edition of the PCAF Global Standard? So PCAF's Global Standard, it provides methodologies on how to measure and calculate finance emissions in portfolios. This development is industry-led, driven by the financial institutions, and the first edition of the PCAF standard currently covers 6 asset classes. As you can see, that each icons represent the asset classes currently covered. You can find a deep dive into each asset class and the data required to do the calculations, as well as the formulas and equations on Chapter 5 of the PCAF standard and also Chapter 10 of the PCAF standard. conscious of time, we won't dive into each and individual of them, but just to give you a flavor, at the bottom of each icon, you can see the general equations and in terms of how, as a financial institution, we can attribute the right amount of financed emissions from the clients, so from the investees and the borrowers. The PCAF standard, it is developed by the financial institutions collaborating with the experts at the PCAF Secretariat for the financial industry. On this slide, we present the logos of the core team members who contributed to the development of the second edition that will be launched soon, of the global standard that will be launched soon. So we believe in the importance of diversity and creating a standard that is truly global, and we value the importance of bringing in insights from a range of regions. So the core team, they are currently working on the second edition of the global standard, and we are hoping to publish the next edition of the standard, aiming for the end of this year. So what we are working on, in the next second edition of the standard, we will include new asset classes, including sovereign debt and emission removals, as well as editorial changes to the methodologies covered by the first edition of the standard. So this is finance emission. But in addition, we will introduce the methodology for two additional terminologies. One is facilitated emission, and the other is insurance associated emissions. So what do they mean, and how are they different to finance emissions? So finance emissions, we are referring to loans and investments, and they are on balance sheets. For facilitated emissions, we recognize there's a significant representative of investment banks who have capital market business in our PCAF network. Therefore, we are looking at accounting methodologies to be able to account for activities such as capital markets instruments and capital market facilitations. So for instance, as an investment bank, when we advise a company on their IPO, how do we account for the facilitated emissions? And the third working group, another part of the standard that will be launched soon, is the insurance associated emissions. So how to account for emissions associated with insurance underwriting. So lots of new knowledge products and working group have been established this year, and we look forward to launch them soon. And last but not least, in addition to introducing new methodologies, we do recognize the importance of implementation and share best practices on implementation. So as part of the core team and as part of the PCAF Secretariat, we have been working to bring on board one case study per asset class, and these will also be launched soon. For the next section of the presentation, I would like to share with you the value of measuring finance emissions. I touched on finance emissions, and I must say, measuring, you may have heard of the saying, what gets measured gets managed, and measuring is a very important element. So measuring finance emissions, it is absolutely crucial. And Scope 3 Category 15 emissions, they form the largest component of the climate impact of a financial institution, and this is why it is crucial for a financial institution to measure their Scope 3 and especially Category 15 financed emissions. The financial institutions, they hold power and the capital to drive change. So on this slide, I would like to share with you the key values and why measuring and disclosing finance emissions can help to achieve other climate-related business goals and align with other industry initiatives. So let's start from business goal number 1, creating transparency for stakeholders. So measuring and disclosing finance emission, it will help to further these climate-related business goals. And finance emissions, they are an important metric in creating transparency for stakeholders. And it will, when you measure the finance emission, it will help you to disclose your finance emissions breakdowns, for example, in a CDP questionnaire or any other disclosure platform that you may wish to submit your data to. For business goal number 2, and is climate on transition risk. Climate change risk can manifest itself not only in the increasing frequency and the severity of extreme weather events, but also through increasing transition risk as we move to a low carbon economy. So finance emissions, they are a key metric to understand climate-related transition risk as per the TCFD. And TCFD officially recommends that banks, asset owners, and asset managers measure and disclose in line with PCAF. So thirdly, finance emissions inform climate strategies and actions to develop products that support the transition towards net zero. For example, just to give an example here, financial institutions may wish to offer green loan products to fund green energy and sustainability projects. Last but not least, on target setting, business goal number 4, and measuring finance emission, it helps to set the baseline and forms the first step for setting a science-based target. So the asset classes in the PCAF standard, they are fully aligned to the SBTi guidance for the financial sector. So what does it mean to be Paris aligned? And Paris alignment, what we mean here is the process by which financial institutions reorient the financial flows away from activities inconsistent with the Paris Agreement and scale up consistent decarbonization activities. What we present, the diagram we present here is known as the Paris Alignment Framework. It essentially lays out the steps to reach net zero emissions by 2050, aligned with the 1.5-degree world. So the first step in achieving net zero by 2050 is to measure and disclose, quantifying the amount of emissions that one is currently producing. This would allow financial institutions to establish an emission baseline that can then be used to set effective emission reduction targets, such as a science-based target, and formulating corresponding strategic plans and take actions. If you're interested, there is a link at the bottom, download the strategic framework. So essentially, it is a paper that demystify the landscape of net zero initiatives and also zoom into each and individual pillar we laid out in this Paris Alignment Framework. And I'm also fortunate to be one of the key authors to this publication. Now, having mentioned the value of measuring finance emissions, I'd like to take you over greenhouse gas accounting implementation. So how PCAF drives implementation through the regional and national collaborations. PCAF, we have our signatory includes financial institutions globally, and we do drive this implementation not only at global level, but also through regional and national collaborations. So this is an organizational structure that we are presenting on this slide here. In Asia-Pacific regions, I want to point you out to Asia-Pacific Regional Implementation Team. We have established PCAF Japan and PCAF Korea. We are also partnering up with local sustainable finance networks to establish PCAF Mongolia. The idea of setting up national and local chapters is to help financial institutions when we see critical mass in a particular region or geography, to help them working on their greenhouse gas accounting and better align their approach to local regulations and the challenges they may face in the local jurisdictions. So we are happy and fortunate to be able to partner up with leading sustainable finance networks to provide this support to local and at the local and national level to these financial institutions in our network. Another thing I often hear on a financial institution's greenhouse gas accounting implementation journey is everyone recognizes that data is often a challenge. So how PCAF can help? So PCAF, we provide a free access to an emission factor database that contains over 5 million emission factors globally for all of our participants. This database, you can see a screenshot on this slide here. It can be seen as a giant Excel. So this database is categorized by the 6 asset classes we touched up on earlier that is currently covered by the first edition of the global standard. It includes data quality scorecard, and it is worth to mention that we don't provide company level data. What we do provide is the emission factors, so physical activity-based and economic activity-based emission factors by sector and industries globally. So financial institutions can then use the industry and use these sector-specific emission factors, even when their company level data, is not available. They can still get started with their greenhouse gas accounting exercise. And PCAF Secretariat provides all of the PCAF participants with free access to this live database. So conscious of time, and I want to dive into the greenhouse gas accounting, the principles, the accounting rules behind the PCAF standard, and give you a flavor in terms of if we do get started with the calculations, how would that look like? So greenhouse gas accounting for financial institutions, it is the annual accounting and disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions associated with loans and investment at a fixed point in time, usually in line with the financial accounting periods. This overarching equation has two parts. The first part is the attribution factor, and the second part is the borrower or the investee's emissions. So essentially, the whole concept is, as a financial institution, a bank, we are calculating how much of the borrower or the investee's emissions should be attributed to the financial institution as their finance emissions. And to find out how this general concept or accounting equation will look like under different asset class, you can take a look at the chapter 5 of the PCAF standard. So essentially, the clients may change. It can be a company, can be a property, can also be a renewable energy project that you are financing. So we do lay out how the equation will look like in each and different cases, and we can find that in the PCAF standard. So in addition to providing those accounting rules, what else is covered by the PCAF standard and the methodologies within? The standard addresses data quality issues and advises on which data can give the most robust results for each asset class. The options of emissions, they correspond to different data quality. You can see there's the data quality scoring card on the left-hand side of the slide. Although we provide this scoring framework, it is worth to mention that they are not exam marks, and is more used as a framework to guide the users of the standard and to guide them to check the data and against this framework. So PCAF under each section of Chapter 5 provides guidance on when to use which option and the detailed equation needed for each option. So the idea is that year over year, as financial institutions publish more and more greenhouse gas accounting and PCAF-related disclosures, as they work through this process, is a journey. We typically see the improvement in the data quality. So the final section of my presentation is to tell you more about participation in PCAF. So joining PCAF also brings multiple additional benefits, and I picked out 3 on this slide here, including transparency, harmonization, and groundwork. I hope that you will be able to read them in your own time. So this slide sets out the specific benefits, including the opportunity to expand your network to a wide range of investors and experts globally. And PCAF offers a forum to all of its members for peer-to-peer collaborations. And we do, to make sure efforts are aligned, PCAF coordinates with initiatives such as the SBTI for financial institutions, the UNEP FI's PRI, and the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance to ensure all of the work of PCAF complements and help participants to fulfill these initiatives' goals. My last slide is on participation in PCAF. So PCAF participants, they essentially, when they join the network, they commit to assess and disclose the greenhouse gas emissions of its financial portfolio. So the commitment, in short, is that measure and disclose the portfolio greenhouse gas emissions within 3 years of signing the commitment letter. And the portfolio coverage is also up to the financial institution. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out, and hope to see you at the Q&A section later. This comes to the end of my presentation, and thank you, and look forward to connecting.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Tiange. We have some questions already from the audience. As you said, the banking industry indirectly creates climate impact through the choice of who to lend and who to invest in. So it's very encouraging that an organization that is industry-led is setting the standards that will make it easier to manage. And as you said, you cannot manage unless you measure. So that's carbon accounting is crucial in that exercise. We'll go to our next speaker, Ed Tongson. Ed is currently the Chief of Party for Sustainable Finance of the Worldwide Fund for Nature Philippines, WWF. He leads the Philippine team as part of a regional initiative to build capacities of the financial sector to channel financial flows to support country commitments to the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Prior to his assignment, he was the project lead of the USAID-funded watershed management project in Isabela, that's in northern Luzon, working with farmers to enhance the resilience to climate change using weather forecasts and crop modeling. He has over 20 years of conservation experience working on various projects of WWF in various capacities. Before that, Ed was the executive director of the Haribon Foundation, where he published peer-reviewed articles on conservation financing, watershed management, climate change, crop modeling, indigenous peoples, and protected areas. Ed earned his MBA and Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Engineering, both from the University of the Philippines, Diliman campus. Ed, the floor is yours.
I'll talk about a topic which is close to my heart, which is nature and its implication to the banks and to the entire sector. So the title of my presentation is lifted from the title of this webinar. It's Greening Finance and Financing Green. This is not just a play of words. This is a sequencing of actions that we do with the sector. And this time we focus on regulations, the central bank and financial supervision, regulatory trends, and the roadmap that would lead to net zero and to a nature positive economy. I'll talk about briefly what we do, but most of the topic will be devoted to building the case for nature and the impact it has created in influencing regulations in the region and especially globally. And finally, the call to action to the regulators with respect to incorporating nature, biodiversity in the prudential framework, risk management systems of central banks and with their supervised FIs. So I'll end my 25 minutes before we start with our Q&A. Briefly, regionally, we're part of a regional initiative in ASEAN to engage the banks, the industry associations, and specific regulators to be able to drive sustainability into the banking system. And this is the greening finance part, without driving sustainability into the DNA of finance institutions, these finance institutions would not be able to finance green. They would not be able to walk the talk with their clients. That's why it's important that the regulations that we've seen so far sets the tone from the top, meaning beginning with the board, the senior management, who will initiate and catalyze the transformation in their respective organizations. So here in the Philippines, we work with government, particularly the two regulatory agencies in the finance sector. These are the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And together with these regulators, we also work with the industry associations. We have the BAP, the Bankers Associations of the Philippines, the Chamber of Thrift Banks, and the Rural Bank Association of the Philippines. So these are the banks that are supervised by our central bank. And then we work with a group of enablers that are building the capacities of banks. And these are mostly the UN agencies. We have the UNEP-FI, UNEP Finance Initiative, the UNESCAP, we have the GRI, we also have the Association of Development Finance Associations of the Philippines, or ADFIAP, which consists of development banks. And we also lately engaged the Asia Sustainable Finance Initiative based in Singapore that does capacity building throughout the region. And I'll explain more about the capacity building platform in my presentation. Just this year, we launched the Sustainable Banking Academy, the Finance Flows Sustainable Academy, as a result of this collaboration with the various groups. And this is lodged in the cloud and could be accessed by any bank in Asia. It has about 5 modules, about 10 hours of online learning that's available. It follows closely the principles for responsible banking, the PRB, and this is was developed with banks in mind, and of course the regulators as well. And it is visually appealing, and it has all the media elements to generate an experience, a learning experience with our learners. So to be able to access the course, there are 2 ways. If you're a Philippine bank with your own learning management system, one can just copy and paste the LMS into your respective LMS within the organization. So this is free for Philippine banks. For individuals, you can register via cloud and you can request for a demonstration. Our colleagues from Singapore will give you an enrollment key for you to try out the system before you roll it, before you decide to roll it in your respective organization. So the cost is free for those who want to copy this into their internal LMS for Philippine banks. For enrolling in for registering in the cloud, one just has to pay the cost of maintaining this in the cloud, which is very minimal. And most of this were capitalized through a grant from the German government, the International Climate Initiative, and for our partners from the AUSA, from the Australian government. So we would invite the members of ABA to try out the portal and to be able to increase the awareness of your membership around sustainable banking. Now to the topic at hand. What we do in this space, particularly with respect to regulations, every year we benchmark the various countries, the central banks, the financial supervisors, in terms of the regulations that they issued that would drive sustainability in their sectors, in the finance sector. So in beginning 2018, 2019, we came up with assessment reports, and we annually publish this in the website. For this year, we expanded the coverage in terms of countries covered from 38 to 44. Now we also include insurance, which has now 83 indicators in assessing sustainable insurance. And we have expanded also the bank indicators from 68 to 85. So we also assess ESG integration among the banks in the region. The indicators have to deals with both climate and nature indicators, and how climate and nature considerations are embedded in the decision-making processes of regulations and in the internal policies of banks. And this year, we just came out with a call for action to the central banks and the financial supervisors on how to transition to a net zero and nature positive economy. And this can be downloaded from our website as well. So here I devote much of the time in building the case for nature. We've seen how the previous 2 presentations built the case for climate-related disclosures. Particularly, climate is a hot issue, as we all know that this year has brought records in terms of drought, heat, and flooding in various parts of the world, which affected many of the economies. And of course, you have the war, which also coincided with this severe events, which also affect most of the economies globally. And it has been stated and it's been recognized that the economies are embedded in nature, because the basis for these economies are produced on how ecosystems behave, or produces these services in terms of materials, pollination services, water retention, climate regulation. So this, you will see that from the World Bank report into 2021, they built a good case for nature, which I'll explain later on in my presentation. But while we're distracted by the pandemic, which is costing the economy over 13.8 billion now until 2024, it's been said that another threat is looming, and this is the twin crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change that could be worse and irreversible. So year after year, we've seen record-setting changes in extreme weather events. According to the WEF, the World Economic Forum, 44 trillion of the economic value generated, or more than half of our global GDP, is attributed to nature and its services. And how we manage nature puts our economy at risk. And given our dependence on nature, a collapse of ecosystem service is estimated to cost us globally 2.7 trillion or 2.3% of global GDP, according to the World Bank, by 2030. And this is a result of a modeling exercise that tries to simulate the effects of collapse in ecosystem services on nature. And before we talk about the findings, this is an attempt to look at how we could measure our dependence on nature in a way that impacts our outputs and also our GDPs. So this is an economy environment model, which is quite novel to my mind, because most of our macroeconomic models are external to the biosphere. It's not incorporating the role of nature. It doesn't value the services that are provided by nature to the economy. This time, the economy environment model assesses the impact of a collapse in ecosystem services in three major areas. In crops, in terms of a collapse in pollination services for crop production, collapse in the fisheries and affects fish supply, and a collapse in timber provision, the supply of wood, and how it will affect the real economy between two time periods, between 2021 and 2030. Well, the results are significant, but what you can take out from the model is still conservative for several reasons. The ecosystem services are limited to just three. The interaction between this and the climate change has not been factored in, which could create more problems to the economy. It uses an input-output model, the computed general equilibrium model, which overstates the economy's ability to adjust. These are the limitations of input-output models. And of course, for emerging economies like the Philippines, there's a large portion of the informal economy that doesn't enter into these models. So therefore, these are small businesses that have no receipts and therefore are not captured in our accounts. So these are underestimations of the impact to the whole economy. And it doesn't incorporate, of course, the current issues that we face, the geopolitical and the societal conflicts that ensue when resource scarcities occur, when countries fight over water, as in Mekong, in Africa. This model doesn't incorporate the downside effects from those conflicts. But then, even if you look at only these three ecosystems, we find that it has disproportionate impacts for low-income countries versus the high-income countries. On the left, you see the blue graphs, which represent the populations that will be affected by ecosystem collapse for all three ecosystems. See on the right the effect of ecosystem collapse on the GDP. Global median collapse would be about 2.3%, or about $2.7 trillion. But a large part of the reductions would be in the emerging economies in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and East Asia and Pacific. The richer countries in Europe, North America, Middle East, North Africa are on the right side of the median, the line that represents the median change. And a large part of this collapse is brought about in forestry, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. In terms of population, going back, many of the emerging economies have this large population. So here in Asia, Philippines included, those who aspire for upper middle income economy status, and some of our Asian colleagues are in the lower middle income, a large part of the populations that are dependent on agriculture, forestry, and fisheries will be affected. So one can see here at the bottom the reference where you can look at the model itself. And effect on individuals on the sectors, and if we look at the decline in production in agriculture, fisheries, and timber, the outputs are large, especially here in Asia Pacific. On the left, you see the decline in absolute numbers in USD billions. A large part of it would come from China. And in terms of percentage GDP, the largest decline is in the Philippines. It's about close to 20%, or this is about 18%. And then followed by Vietnam, Malaysia, China, Indonesia. So most of the countries listening to this call will be affected by decline, a partial collapse in ecosystems for these three ecosystems. For the Philippines, particularly, the decline is 18%, as I mentioned, or $12.2 billion. For crop output, the Philippine decline is 17% versus global decline of 9%, almost double. That represents about $5 billion. And for fisheries, in which the Philippines very much depends on, the decline is 22%, large by global standards, and this represents 3.5 billion loss. So the impacts are not felt only by the primary sector, but it has spillover consequences in the intermediate sectors, especially manufacturing, food processing, retail, wholesale, especially MSMEs, where food production very much is the main source of revenues for MSMEs in the country. And of course, a large part of the informal sector has to do existing agriculture. Therefore, the impact is even understated when you consider the effects to the informal sector. So what can the finance market do? I mean, especially the central banks. Much of our exposure of the financial sector in these two asset classes are huge. Global debt amounts to 124 trillion. Well, 8 trillion is in fossil fuels. Small part is in sustainable debt instruments and other debt instruments and the composition is down here. It's found here below. And the exposure to by the equities market is also huge, 95 trillion. A large part is held by sovereign wealth, followed by equity, almost half of what sovereign wealth is exposed to. And a simulation by the Sustainable Finance Lab of the Utrecht University in Amsterdam, in Netherlands, concluded that if the 4 central banks support the ecological transformation, it could induce a global reduction of GHG emissions from 5 to 12%. So only 5 central banks, that they have correct policies and enforce these policies, it could result this much GHG emissions. So that's the power of bank regulations as it drives, the potential to drive investments away and into climate-aligned projects. So we see regulatory pressure in climate. We've seen how PCFD is now made mandatory in several jurisdictions, including some countries. Singapore is thinking of making this mandatory. And nature risks is now there's a soft signal from the central banks about the materiality of nature, of biodiversity risk. In the recent NGFS occasional paper, which looks at the materiality of biodiversity and nature risks to the sector, there is a clear pathways that are being explored, how nature risks could propagate into the economy and affect financial institutions and affect decisions of the central bank and regulators in terms of the impairment to capital adequacy and solvency, and how it will affect monetary policies, macroprudential supervision. And the same way what we see in climate, nature risks as both physical and transition risks, which will find its way into the economy in terms of impairment of assets, lower corporate profitability, lower revenues and higher costs, potential also biodiversity-related investment opportunities, the upside of the transition, and also the impairment of the insurability of nature-based insurance from nature, and also the growth of nature-based insurance solutions. So there is some soft signaling coming from the BCBS, incorporating nature risks in its future round of prudential guidance for central banks. Right now, there are central banks that have initiated their own actions to explore or to act upon nature risks in various ways, from understanding through research, assessing and giving out the policy signals, by coming up with prudential policies and instruments, and looking at their respective portfolios, and looking how to design a nice financial architecture. And also disclosures, financial market conduct, policy liaison and coordination, monetary policies. And here we find most of this emerging from Western Europe and also some countries in Latin America, but it's finding its way here in Asia as well. Some central banks have started to assess their exposure to financial institutions to fiscal risks, as well as transition risks. This provides a baseline for further actions. Here we find that Malaysia, the Bank Negara, has already started to understand, they stress test the banking system to find out where their vulnerabilities lie. And this follows other stress testing exercises by different countries. Here it shows the importance of understanding the exposure of Malaysian banks to palm oil, especially in the Borneo, and much of the exposure of these banks also lies on how ecosystem affects palm oil production in those areas, and would affect also the performance of borrowers of Malaysian banks. So a publication is now readily available in their respective website. For the ASEAN, so we have several jurisdictions coming out with their own respective circulars, and I won't go through each one of them. Here is the call action to for central banks to build themselves, to build an analytical framework to understand the interaction between nature and their economy and the exposures of the banks themselves. And I'll leave a copy of this slide to you and the references for your future reading. For the Philippines, this is a call for the Philippine banking system to add their skin in the game. 11.84 trillion pesos in outstanding loans find their way to the economy. How it drives sustainability in those respective sectors is the call for PBS to add their skin to the game. And if we look at how those 11 trillion distributed, a large part of this is in real estate, followed by wholesale, retail, manufacturing. And if we look at the direct impacts of this lending and also the dependencies of this lending from nature, we find that 36% of their lending materially impacts land and water use, followed by climate change, and 19% for pollution. And these are the real estate, power generation, construction, agriculture, mining, and quarrying sectors. So that's for their impacts. On their dependencies, 28% of the system are lent to sectors that depend on physical inputs, protection and production services from nature, meaning these are ecosystem services that benefit the enterprise and all the borrowers of the banks. And these are in the sectors of manufacturing, power generation, construction, agriculture, and fisheries, water supply, and sanitation. Note most of the lending to agriculture and the climate sensitive and nature sensitive sectors are held by rural and cooperative banks, in which agriculture makes up 16% of their portfolio. Of the lending to agriculture, a fourth is lent to rice growing, and the same amount is lent to aquaculture and fishing, 24%, and a lesser amount to corn. This is a call for the banks to add their skin to the game by driving sustainability to the respective lending and investment portfolios. And hopefully this provides a pathway in which we see by 2050 a climate positive nature and also net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Your approach of focusing on nature, on biodiversity, is a fresh approach. It's a different take on a common issue. And indeed, many businesses are dependent on nature. You're right. Now, let's start with a question for Eliza. Some banks have yet to start their ESG journey, and the question is an important basic question, and it is, what should be the minimum requirements for a bank to start with their ESG journey? What would your recommendations be, Eliza?
I think for a bank who are about starting their ESG journey, they probably are different dimensions that this bank need to pay attention to. And I believe the bank can learn a lot from a lot of other banks around the world, including banks in Europe and in many Asian countries like Singapore. And I also share many Taiwan banks practices. So I think doing by learning is a good way. And I think for the ESG, since it covers the governance, environmental, and the social side, for any banks that have a good financial record, I believe they have done part of the ESG because they have sustain the financial value and provide feedback to their stockholders, to their investors, and also to take care of their employees. But I think for the society, expect financial institution to do the most is to help the society and help companies to achieve ESG or achieve reducing carbon emission through the investment and financing of banks. So I think to do that, the first thing that the bank need to understand probably is the carbon emission inventory of its own, including its scope 1 carbon emission, scope 2 carbon emission, and also the scope 3, particularly the investment and financing carbon emission calculation. I think that's why we also have the expert from PCAF here today to share with you all.
So a nice segue is somebody asked, how do you calculate emissions of various assets? Obviously, their curiosity was piqued by the fact that there indeed is a way to measure. And passing on from Eliza to Tiange, give us some idea of how the calculation is made.
If I have to describe the whole journey of how to get started on measuring finance emissions, I would say number one step is to define the scope of your assessment. So what do I mean by that? For example, thinking about, okay, I'm getting started for my first disclosure. I would like to measure the finance emission for a specific asset class or in my investment in particular geography. For instance, I maybe want to get started with all my domestic business loan first, because it forms majority of my portfolio. And also at the same time, the data for domestic data may be easier to gather. So these are some of the thinkings going around. I would say step one is to define the scope of assessment. Once the scope is defined, we know what we are accounting in the first year. Then the next step I would say is to identify the data needs. So this is where the PCAF standard comes very handy, because you can go straight to the chapters where we have the methodologies and the data required to do the calculations for each asset class. So identify the data needs to measure, and afterwards, based on those data needs, to start collecting the data. Maybe an iterative process here, because you may realize some data is available, some are not. Maybe you have to go for a lower data quality score when getting started. And maybe you realize, oh, there's actually various ways to collect, and we'll make sure we use the most up-to-date and best-in-class data to do the calculation. So that leads on to step 3, which is to apply the method. So that is the math. In Excel, let's build a tool. We gather the data and make sure the attribution factor is multiplied with the right emissions level data I collected from the companies and the clients. So that's the apply method. And last but not least is to prepare the reports and integrate the absolute emissions that you calculated into your disclosure and reports. I know I summarized it in 4 steps. In reality, it's probably take some time. But what I have seen is about a third of the PCAF signatories have made their first or many disclosures.
Thank you. My bank is going through the same process actually, so I'm sort of familiar. And I think one of the fastest ways to answer that question is join the PCAF. The next question was written while Ed was presenting. Ed, for ESG to be effective, how do we address the gaps between incomes, like rich versus underdeveloped countries? Most of the poorer countries have forests that are vital to ESG. On the other hand, technology that assists in sustainability is mostly owned by developed countries. We from the underdeveloped countries complain that we have the forests, while on the other hand, the developed countries have the technology to help us. How do we go about, working together? What good practices have you seen along these lines?
The Philippine position in the climate negotiation in Paris is really to seek justice, because we have never been the polluter in the first place, and yet we are the victims. And this requires Annex 1 countries, the Western countries, to share technologies, resources, because they owe it to us. It's not something they are, it's not like a gift. It's a compensation to bringing us to this problem that we have right now. And despite that we have no part in the emissions, we're not a major emitter like themselves. And so that was what has been agreed upon with respect to climate vulnerable countries and in emerging economies like the Philippines. And of course, this also requires us to protect our ecosystems so that this will not be used for development purposes in a way that it will be reducing our future capacities to be able to grow. So that's part of our game, no? Our part of our ball game, no? in the climate negotiations.
Maybe just to start with you for the second round. As a banker, one of our concerns, and this is a question that everybody keeps asking, one of our concerns is the financial industry, already tightly regulated, has probably the more advanced sustainability-related rules. On the other hand, once we do, for example, our PCAF calculation, once we work with Tiange, the question is our ability to, for lack of a better word, to enforce the standards on other industries, manufacturing industries, for example. We don't know quite how to address.
Well, I think the question is what is the incentives for your borrowers to embrace this new low carbon pathways, no, or technologies that's available to them.
Not just that, Ed, because in our case, we have penalties potentially. There's no carrot and stick on their side. Anyway, please, your thoughts on this.
If you start with what are the financial incentives for borrowers, for example, construction, if you could show savings in electricity, water, by properly designing this, and also how they could incorporate like solar rooftops, so be able to avail of the net zero, I mean the reverse metering that's available now with Meralco, that would reduce the cost of ownership of a building over its life. And these are values that are gained by borrowers if they embark on these investments on water and energy efficiency. So those are low-hanging fruits because they gain, they have a financial incentive to do this.
Yes, yes.
Second, if they're knowledgeable about climate risks, they would know how the asset that they collateralized or even used by the bank, no, to securitize the loan, these are shared risks between the bank and the asset owners. And they understand that these risks are real, and these are becoming real as the years go by. And that this is a shared endeavor both between the banks, the insurance, and the asset owner to be able to pay, the risks, to finance the risks whichever they materialize. And this also segues into making their investments, their assets climate proof, meaning prepare for the worst hazards that will happen in that respective location. So in the long run, the entire life cycle of the asset, that will generate less impairment cost over time, and it will protect your long-term investments and even for the banks who have a long-term exposure to these assets.
The banks, we should be motivated to help in educating, or at least giving ideas, giving great ideas, giving constructive ideas to our customers, especially the borrowers. Now, let me pass this on to Tiange. I'm curious whether you have a specific PCAF case study that's related to banks and certain borrowers are able to work together to address the issues that that Ed and I were talking about earlier.
So I think going back to my transparency point earlier, transparency is very important. So in fact, all financial institutions who have published a disclosure or have disclosed their finance submissions, they are all on PCAF's website. So I'm happy to put the link to where we can all find them in the chat box. Please feel free to review. There are lots of great disclosures. And in terms of the official case studies that will come on board, we are working towards the end of this year or early next year timeline. So please stay tuned. They will be out soon. And yeah, please stay up to date on PCAF social media.
It's easy to Google. I've done that several times. This theme of getting our borrowers motivated. Maybe the best example was one slide that Eliza had on 2 sustainability-linked loans, and she skipped that, I think intentionally. I'd like her to talk about it now, please, Eliza.
I mentioned in my slide, there are different ways for companies who wish to improve their sustainability or ESG performance. One is to enter the sustainability linked loan with individual banking or financial institutions. And the other way is to raise the fund from the public market. So I introduced Taipei Exchange Sustainable Bond Market, and I also mentioned the sustainability linked loan in Taiwan. And actually, there are not only these 2 companies, there are probably more than 10 companies that have entered into sustainability linked loan agreement with either foreign banks in Taiwan or Taiwan domestic banks. So, and how it works is that if the company can achieve the certain KPI that have previously agreed with this bank, then the interest rate can be lowered down. And based on the public information and our observation, the discount on the interest rate actually range from maybe 2 basis points to 6 basis points, depending on each company's credit rating, because the sustainability linked loan, the ESG KPI was added to original credit rating evaluators. So ESG KPI is not the only factor that affects the interest rate, but for the sustainability linked loan, based on our current observation, the discount, as I mentioned, is about from 2 basis points to 6 points. And while the other funds raising transaction I mentioned is through the public market by issuing sustainability bonds that can be user proceeds bond or sustainability linked bond. For example, let's take sustainability linked bond as example. Based on the information we collected from Luxembourg Green Exchange, the sustainability linked bond may give interest rates penalty ranging from 5% to 75%. So different from the sustainability linked loan I mentioned just before, most of the sustainability linked bond have the mechanism to raise the interest rate if certain KPI are not met. So I think this is different mechanism. And as I mentioned, based on the public data, the interest rate gap might range from like 5 basis points to 75 basis points, depending on each company's credit rating. So that's the information I can share with you.
So basically, I can already imagine a situation where if I'm on my 2nd year or 3rd year of PCAF, and I have very clear targets to get to 0 earlier than 2050, I can use those incentives and penalties to to get my portfolio closer to my target, no? Basically, that's what we're saying. Interesting. Okay, I knew chairing this session would be very useful for me. Oh, Ed, somebody wrote this question for you specifically. Can you cite significant initiatives that the Philippine government has made towards the achievement of a climate-safe and nature-positive economy? The Philippines, you said this yourself, has been taking a beating from many climate events which has greatly impacted our economy.
Yeah, I think the government invested in disaster preparedness. First, we have now a new set of hazard maps, which is made available free of charge to the public. And this is used by local governments in identifying and prioritizing their DRM, their disaster risk reduction management projects. So this is very much an important step, because every now and then when we have a hazard, just like the recent one, local governments have to be forewarned when it will happen, where it will happen, and how to pre-position some of the help that would be needed once those events happen. And also for post-disaster recovery, there is also some initiatives. What is interesting now is we have now a catastrophe bond, which was raised from overseas, which would pay 25 LGUs for damages if a major event passes through their jurisdiction. So there's now a way to finance disaster, not necessarily coming from the government coffers, but also looking at how this innovative modes of financing could also be replicated now by the industry as well.
We've been talking about investors giving incentives, the regulators, etc. Now, in my country, one of my experiences is being regulated by civil society or community organizations. In your country, to what extent is civil society or community organizations involved in climate change or in enforcing certain standards? Like, what I've seen in my country is that civil organizations are holding banks accountable for their loans to coal companies, for example, or to coal-powered plants. What's the experience like in Taiwan?
In Taiwan, we are at the stage that capital market regulator has imposed many regulations to require company to enter into ESG activities and also net zero transition plan. And that's the same for the financial institutions, as I mentioned in my slides. So I think the civil society's awareness about the importance of green finance and ESG sustainability finance are increasing day by day, month by month. So I think that's good. I think the regulators' policies is really a very strong driving force. So I think that work together with the internationalized business practice for Taiwanese company, and we learned by the counterparty that we have business with, and we share this information and communicate with the Taiwan public. I think that's the whole reasons that we can have some of the good example. Like I mentioned, we have 5 financial institutions in Taiwan that have got approval from SBTI, like Cathay and Yisang, Fubon, Yuanda, and Taixing. And with their commitment to carbon emission reduction, especially for the scope 3, I think the Taiwan industry can benefit and can move along together with Taiwan's financial sector to net zero and sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you. Tiange, how does one go about being a member of PCAF? How do you start the membership process?
To join PCAF is a very simple process. We have a commitment letter, and that is available on the PCAF website. So as a financial institution, all you need to do is to download the commitment letter, review, sign, and share and send it to PCAF's general mailbox, which is info@carbonaccountingfinancials.com. And we will then take it from there. It is worth to mention at the moment it is free to join because PCAF is funded by philanthropies.
It's free. All you have to do is download and sign the commitment letter. Thank you. I think we'll end it with that. As we close, we want to thank again Ms. Lee, Ms. Wei, and Mr. Tongson for the excellent presentations and answers. We're also grateful to the audience for the thoughtful questions that enriched our discussion. Green and sustainable finance will remain central to our discussions in the years to come, especially in Asia, where, as Ed mentioned, we always take a beating when climate change strikes. We at ABA hope that our speakers' expert presentations and the discussions that followed have enhanced and deepened your understanding of the topic. Thank you.
Thank you again, everybody, and see you again tomorrow. Bye.